You're tuned in to Indie Live Radio, and this is our Yes Group Spotlight series. Today we feature the Yes Southside Glasgow group, who invited Bill Austin to speak at an online meeting. Bill's presentation is called Borders and Customs. It's a topic that is no doubt going to be debated heatedly in the second referendum campaign, so here's your chance to find out about it from an expert. Bill will be looking at the myths around the concept of a hard border, and he'll explore what a fair customs system in an independent Scotland might look like. The visual aids that he refers to during the talk are available on our Indie Live Radio blog, along with links to further info about borders and customs. And Indie Live Radio team just want to say here thank you to Yes Southside Group for agreeing to let us broadcast this meeting. We really appreciate it. Hope you enjoy the talk. Here it is.
So welcome everybody to the first Zoom meeting from Yes Southside. And thank you so much, Bill, for doing it for us. So this is Bill. I'll just introduce him. He's an author who is very knowledgeable on the subject of borders and customs. He's worked for 30 years with Customs and Excise, and also with the Army in smuggling roles, anti-smuggling roles. And he's also worked on customs reforms in a range of countries. So tonight he's going to do a presentation, and it's going to be like in 4 parts. So if you want to ask questions on each of the 4 parts, just at that time at the 4 parts, if you know what I mean. And I think the best way might be just to put questions into the chat. Does that sound all right?
Okay, hello everybody. I'm absolutely jangling here. I've never done Zoom or anything like this before. I've done public presentations and what have you, but this is definitely a first. So, as Jen said, what we'd like to do is do 4 bite-sized chunks so that, you know, customs and borders are a fairly complicated, involved subject. But if we take it in sort of 4 upfront subjects, and as we roll along, I'll take questions and do my best to answer them, and then move on to the next one. What I'm also saying is, when I rattle through the 4 subjects here, which is where we are currently within the UK customs and borders, then the second issue is hard border, because everybody wants to talk about that. Then the third thing would, how would a Scottish customs service look like? What would we want to achieve to get us to a better place? And then the 4th thing is the aspiration side of it. So with that, all I've got is a couple of prepared paragraphs which I'll read, and then we can just roll with the questions. If I could expand a wee bit on my introduction, I did work for Customs and Excise for about 30 years, everywhere from Dover up to Unst in Shetland, where the nearest railway station for our equipment was actually Stavanger on the forms, points east and west, Northern Ireland, Southern Ireland, France, and I worked in ports, airports, inland clearance depots, excise stations, by that I mean whisky distilleries, warehousing, which gave me a fairly kind of mad customs CV, which can come to being a customs officer for during that 30-year period. I was also a territorial officer. And what that led to was the Army said, well, do you know what, can you get 8 years special leave? You're still on the books of Customs and Excise, but you'll be in the regular Army, and we would like you to do a bit of anti-smuggling in West Africa and the Balkans. Why am I telling you this? What's it got to do with anything? Well, what that then sort of fed into was where a customs service fits into national defence. So immediately you've got a link there between customs and borders. And I'll kind of harp on it this a wee bit, because it's really important that folk kind of hoist in that actually, you know, the customs side of it is fine, but there's all sorts of other things fall out of it. So what it also gave hands-on experience of was setting up new customs services. So what I'm saying is that I've got hands-on experience of what it's like for post-conflict societies, sometimes known as Kalashnikov economies, who have to start from scratch. I know Scotland wouldn't be starting from scratch as such, but there's a lot of similarities. There's a big list of things not to do, put it that way. And then the other side of that is that I'm not setting myself up as a black belt ninja customs dude who has the answer to everything. I just don't. And in fact, working in French West Africa, I picked up their phrase for a magic wand. It's a baguette magique. Je n'ai pas une baguette magique. I don't have a magic baguette. You know, what I'm saying is, though, given practical hands-on experience, there's things that we could be doing a lot better, and certainly what we shouldn't be doing. So without further ado, if everybody's kind of happy with that, then what I'll do is I'll batter into the first chunk, which is that the current UK government has no concept of what integrated borders management means, sometimes known as IBM. The EU definition of integrated borders management, to which an independent Scotland must aspire, is national and international coordination amongst all relevant authorities and agencies involved in border security and trade facilitation to establish effective, efficient and coordinated border management at the external EU borders in order to reach the objective of open but well-controlled and secure borders. Okay, so that was a bit kind of crunchy as a start off. What I'm also saying is that given that the UK government is all over the place, and you only need to watch the news on Brexit, you can see that the UK currently maintains a dysfunctional system focused on a dysfunctional border system focused on aggressive confrontation and exclusion, born of Theresa May's hostile environment and poisonous immigration policy. What I'm saying is UK borders control is Home Office anti-immigration priority. Customs don't have a look in. This is to the detriment of revenue collection and protection as understood internationally by customs primacy, exercised on behalf of a nation's exchequer or treasury. UK demonstrates appallingly poor governance. The key thing to hoist in here is there hasn't been a customs officer at a UK port or airport for the last 15 years. It's HM Customs and Excise was disappeared in 2005 by Gordon Brown on behalf of his city cronies. So what? That means multinationals have been completely deregulated, and we'll come back to why that's a bad thing. So evidence of this reprehensible governance is the existence of a UK annual 120 billion, say that again, 120 billion tax gap. This is failure to collect customs revenues, which are known and identified as requiring collection, but is not collected. So what could NHS Scotland do with its share of this uncollected cash? So that's the first bite-sized chunk. What I'm saying is the UK is all over the place. It doesn't have a customs service at the border. It has UKBF. They do immigration. They don't do customs stuff. The HMRC that folk will know about, the revenue and customs part, they're all inland. They don't have anybody at the ports and airports. So the customs and excise that I joined as a boy when in fact when Pontius Pilate was a boy, that customs and excise doesn't exist anymore. So there is nothing to hand over on Independence Day. We're going to have to start with a piece of A4. And certainly what I strongly believe is we don't replicate the current broken UK dysfunctional system, which unfortunately the first IndyRef document, the white paper, that's exactly what it said. And that was a kind of, oh my God moment, which, you know, I ended up with 10 thumbs battering out an angry man book on customs, revenues and defence, because actually, as I've already said, let's not replicate the broken UK system, because it's costing every single one of us at this Zoom meeting a lot of money. Is everybody okay with that? Stunned silence.
Yes.
Okay, so I mean, I can see a slide here with a bottle of whiskey, and approximately, you know, a bottle of whiskey on a supermarket shelf is about 16 quid. So who gets what? What does Scotland get? Where does the cash go? And at the top, Scotland gets a very small percentage, because that is largely the cash that goes to the distillery or the warehouse in Scotland, employing a few people. The vast majority of the cash, the value added tax, goes down to London, or was actually a kind of European tax at one point, but it's now going to London. And the excise amount is the revenues that's collected on fuels, on alcohol, and all sorts of inland taxes. So anybody looking at that slide, this is what the customs guy gets involved in, is that revenue that you see there. It should go to the Scottish Treasury. Okay, could we have the next slide, please? And this second slide illustrates the same thing. You fill up your car with petrol, you pay the money at the till, and actually you can see at a glance there how much stays in Scotland with the retailer, and then how much the Exchequer gets. The funny old thing, the point about these two slides is that these taxes, these revenues are not controlled by the Scottish Government. These are reserved taxes. So just thinking about the amount of revenue on a litre of petrol or a bottle of whiskey, and start thinking in terms of 40-foot containers worth of booze and alcohol coming into the UK or into Scotland. Where is that money going? Or if we're talking about fuel for a car, think about it in terms of the amount of fuel an Arctic needs, or let's talk about the amount of fuel a ship needs or an aircraft. And actually all these revenues start to spiral up from, not from 58 pence and 21 pence, but into millions and billions of pounds. I've made a bold statement that the UK isn't collecting this properly. Well, how can they? Because at the borders, there are no customs guys. You've got guys in black who are very, their sole focus is immigration, because that's the London policy. Okay, so the next slide, please. This is the consequence of UK strategy, how they see tax and how it's collected or not, as the case may be. You can see at a glance there from this Business for Scotland slide, is that we're not doing this very well, and that maybe Scotland would generate cash revenues for our hospitals, for the education, for our infrastructure, etc., in a manner that benefits our communities and is not being run in the interests of multinational corporations. You'll be pleased to know there's only two more slides to this one chunk, but hopefully it's bringing it home where we are right now and where we should be heading towards. Could I have the next slide, please? Okay, so we've had Shell. We're actually very, very nice to BP as well. Because again, you can see at a glance that where some people would argue, hold on a minute, Angola, isn't that one of these banana republics in a racist type, British Empire type fashion? They're actually raising gazillions. Well, I worked in West Africa, in Congo, Angola, and actually having set up their revenue systems, it's actually very pleasing to see that they've hoisted in the points, and actually they're generating a lot of revenue for their communities, unlike the left-hand side of the screen there, where you can see we actually are quite keen on giving multinationals massive subsidies. So where does that take us? This is the final slide to do with the first point. If we could have that.
Do you want to?
Yeah, the fifth one. Right, tax gap. This to me summarises where the UK currently is in terms of customs, borders and revenues. On the right hand side, there's a massive column there saying 120 billion lost yearly, and it's tax avoided, evaded and uncollected. That's the corporations, ladies and gentlemen. On the other side, you can see the amount of benefit fraud, the DWP money that's being lost as a compare and contrast. Guess which focus the UK government revenue strategy, where it's directed. I couldn't fit it on the slide, but on the left-hand side, the DWP have approximately 3,000 investigators to chase boys that are on ESA, 71 quid a week, moonlighting as window cleaners. 3,000 guys chasing 71 quid a week. On the other side, what you've got is the tax gap that I mentioned, 120 billion annually. And anecdotally from HMRC pension prisoners, i.e. boys that are still in the department, there's about 300 investigators who are, resource strapped. They can't get anywhere near that 120 billion. I'll break that down a wee bit in terms of what is the tax gap, what exactly do I mean? Of that 120 billion, approximately 75% is domestic evasion. So that means folk just poking the books, smuggling if you like. 5% of it is offshore evasion. That's the boys with the tax havens and what have you. 5% doesn't sound very much, but 5% of 120 billion is an outrageous amount of money. Then you've got domestic avoidance, which runs about 12%. Just straightforward errors, 3%, and non-payment, 4%. What I would like to stress here is the tax gap is revenues identified that we know that are out there, that are uncollected. Go figure. So, again, I stand ready to defend my position on the UK government getting this really, really wrong. Today, I went on to the Northern Ireland Customs Trade Academy to see how the Brexit malarkey was going. And I went through an hour's long course, very similar to this on Zoom. And the conclusion was, at the end of it, they constantly talked about customs examinations, customs declarations, customs staff. This website is set up by UK government. It is utterly disingenuous. There are no customs officers at the ports or borders or airports. So for a customs trade academy to be set up to completely miss the point that the guys who may actually be involved at a point of import is actually an immigration dude who is not empowered in law to carry out customs controls, because you have to be vetted, you have to be trained. So the next time you hear, when Gov says we're all over this, we've got, what is it, he said 7,000 new UK BF dudes, 1,000 HMRC dudes. You have to trust me in this one. When you're training people, it takes about 3 years on average to get somebody to understand what they're doing, and maybe about 5 years to be effective. to be front foot as a customs officer with a revenue nose who can get in amongst these amounts. The UK is all over the place. We can do much, much better. Okay, so that's the kind of the first chunk, if everybody wants to fire in.
Alistair McFadgen saying, how is this revenue collected, Bill? Is it an automated system that's generally uncontrolled and unregulated?
Okay, excellent question. Well brought out, Alistair. Thanks very much. What the UK system is currently at import is, yes, it's an automated system, but it's got a green screen and it was made 30 years ago. It's called Chief. So that's been creaking for a long, long time. They brought in a new system called CDS, which has been sort of trialled, but they reckon there's going to be, on the 1st of January 2021, Humpty Dumpty million customs declarations are going to hit this electronic system. And of course, everything will go okay. So that's me just being cynical. But in answer to your question, yes, it's an automated system. Is it controlled? Is it regulated? Well, that comes back to my staffing point, that there's a lot of, like God help the people that are actually going to have to try and deal with this. But is it a sweeping generalisation to say it's uncontrolled and unregulated? By the looks of things, yes, it will be. Well, in fact, I'll back up what I'm saying. The 1st of January to the 31st of July is an honesty box. There will be no customs checks or UK BF checks. Everything's going to get waved through. Does anybody see a problem with that? So the next question, it says, if there is no customs, how are drugs and arms discovered? Well, I've just answered that one basically. That an immigration officer with the best will in the world isn't actually going to be that switched on to identifying a weapon or explosives or controlled drugs. That takes quite a lot of time to build up expertise on. I think that's been the case for actually almost a decade now. And the big combat indicator there is the price of drugs on the streets in Glasgow, for example. Has it got cheaper or more expensive? Because that normally tells you if you're winning or not. Any idea of comparisons with other Western European countries on tax avoidance rates? If I could answer that big picture-wise, going back to the multinational corporations, if you go onto Google, you can see which countries take the most money from the corporations. Obviously, that's in everybody's interest or the guy in the street's interest, because if they're putting in stacks of money, then it means my income tax threshold should be a wee bit higher, or maybe my pension should be a wee bit higher. The giveaway is that UK is almost rock bottom within the current 27 EU countries for getting cash from the multinationals. The Germans are obviously very aggressive at it, so actually, maybe that's what we want to be considering. Next question, if we should not copy UK system, is there a country we could partner with to set up our system and train customs officers? If you don't mind, that's the third chunk where we should aspire to. And if Alex can remind me, I don't know how you remind somebody on chat, but just bring that up again, because in terms of starting with a blank piece of A4, your point's very valid. Alistair McFadgen, are there still programs like IPR and OPR, and is there any evidence as to evasion or avoidance there? Maybe not, as we have no manufacturing industry anymore. That's techie stuff, customs techie stuff. These are reliefs that companies who want to bring stuff in and not pay any revenue at import, they can have it worked in a factory in Glasgow and then sent out. It's a kind of controlled system. So is there any evidence as to evasion or avoidance there? The answer to that one is the UK currently has no solid audit visits. They gave up doing VAT visits and excise visits at premises as a part of a control programme. They gave that up a long time ago. So do these nice people at the multinationals, I know I'm having a go at them all the time, do they make mistakes, let's call it? Or are they less conscientious than they might be playing by the rules, and therefore our revenues are properly collected and protected? Well, I'll leave you to work it out yourself. Part of your question is in the tax gap, evasion and avoidance. How would we know? Well, if you don't go out there to actually chap on the fella's door and have a walk around the premises, etc., with a revenue nose, you're not really going to find it. Is the paper you co-authored for Commonweal still current? Yes, it is. At the end, normally at a presentation you would have handouts. Between Jane and myself, we've got 3 handouts. So I'll come back to that document. Is everybody kind of okay with that first chunk? Did that kind of make sense? This is where, the UK is all over the shop and we're losing gazillions. Okay.
Are the Scottish Government aware of this?
Is the Scottish Government aware of it? Yes, they are. But they've got one hand tied behind their back because we're into reserved revenues and revenues which are devolved. So, yeah, undoubtedly, these stories, what I'm saying is not apocryphal. They can't not know. But then you would like to think that should be part of the driving force to get the levers that the independence movement constantly talk about. The levers are customs revenues, etc.
Oh, there's another question here from Janine.
Janine, you said no office in ports and airports for 50 years. Does that go hand in hand with EU membership? I mean, was that removal based on membership? It's not 50 years, it's 1515. 2005, Gordon Brown amalgamated HM Customs with the Inland Revenue to create HMRC, the organisation that exists today. Did it go hand in hand with EU membership? No, it didn't. The historical backdrop to that is 9/11 in the States, 2003 maybe. The customs service in America got battered because there were issues over intelligence sharing, and I'm back to the defence side of things. What one of the direct results of that was the US government put a red pen through the US customs service, which had existed for about 100 years. On the one hand, you can sort of understand why it took place. On the other hand, they just got rid of a 100-year-old organisation that collected revenues from the multinationals for American communities. Funny old thing, Gordon Brown saw that as a tremendous idea and got Lord MacDonald to say, those customs and excise dudes, get rid of them. Okay, Jane, can you bring up the slide with the map on it, please? Right, okay, so the second chunk is let's talk in terms of customs control and hard borders, because obviously this is something that we haven't really been dealing with very well. But my point would be that anyone who asserts a hard border will be required when Scotland's independence immediately demonstrates a complete ignorance of the subject of borders. EU accession requires compliance with their customs requirements called EU Acquis. It's like it's EU law, but it's anybody want to join the EU has to agree to the rules of the club. So EU Acquis is what Scotland would aspire to. So customs is a law enforcement gig. Everything you do is based in law. Okay, so it's very, very important that our borders would comply with EU law if indeed we're joining the EU. So when you read EU Acquis, and actually you can find it on the EU Commission website, it's actually not mega legalese, it's actually quite easy to read. But I challenge anybody to have a read through it. And when I looked at it, there is zero mention nor requirement for a hard border within Acquis. Indeed, my first point on IBM, Integrated Border Management, confirms this, that the EU aspires to have an open but well-controlled and secure borders. So what am I saying? What I'm saying is the key to winning this argument on the hard borders is to persuade the Scots electorate to think of self-governing Scotland as an independent legal jurisdiction which has internationally recognised legal boundaries. If you take a quick look at the map, you'll see immediately that the bit between Solway and Tweed that everybody immediately goes to, oh, that'll be the hard borders. We must have all our customs staff in there, delays, big hairy dugs, barbed wire, all you know, like searchlights, all the good stuff. And then you look at Scotland's legal jurisdiction on independence. It is huge. So what am I saying? What I'm saying is that a customs officer and a mobile customs station at Gretna, for example, in an open borders 21st century European community has very little impact and demonstrates how unionists completely missed the point. What I'm saying is there's no point in having, in my professional experience, there is no point in having a guy in a sentry box at Gretna with a clipboard. You're just wasting your time. So the unionists, as soon as they say hard border, completely miss the point. Hard borders is a Project Fear 2 distraction, which is an attempt to confuse our electorate by claiming it as a showstopper when, in fact, it's an irrelevant red herring. So I'll expand on this a wee bit. Got a couple of pub questions which maybe folk would be able to get involved with. First of all, what is the distance between Solway and Tweed, this hard border that they talk about? Anybody? Anybody want to have a go? 150 kilometres, okay. So that's where, if any of you are the new heat banana of the new customs service, hard borders is the name of the game. You want 1,000 customs guys on that 150 kilometre stretch between Solway and Tweed. But actually you've got the advantage of looking at this map and you're going, hold on a minute, that doesn't make much sense, even just on straightforward logic. So the next pub question, what is the length of Scotland's coastline at high tide, given coastline and islands? Does anybody want to have a dig at that one? That's a negative silence. Anybody?
4,000 miles.
4,000 miles, higher. I'll give you the answer. On the Scottish Maritime website, the answer is 18,672 kilometres. I'll say that again, including all of our islands, and I believe there's some people from Skye and maybe even Barra tuned in tonight. You're included. 18,672 kilometres. For a bit of perspective from a customs point of view and how you do things, the coastline of metropolitan France is 3,500 kilometres. So I'll let that hang for a wee minute. The coastline of France is 3,500 kilometres. They deploy their resources as best they can to cover that. So our start point, and maybe, you know, as a wee bit of audience participation, you want to consider yourselves as this is day one of your new customs career, right? You've all passed the vet, you're all Scottish customs guys. And as part of the introductory day one in your induction course, an old dude like myself will come up and try and give you the kind of big picture thing. and he throws it out to you. You've got 18,000 miles of coastline. How are you going to patrol that? How are you going to control that? Let's bring that back to the hard border. And if you don't mind, I'll make use of Barra as an example. If the coastline of Barra, which is at the bottom end of the Outer Hebrides, if nobody really knows, if on Barra the coastline is border, which actually it would be, what are we talking about? I mean, we know the boys at the bottom end of Barra on Vatersay, the Vatersay boys, they're quite tasty smugglers, eh? And they're always bringing up the cognac and the cigars up into in Castle Bay, because they're a wild lot with their hedonistic lifestyle. They're always having big mad parties and ceilidhs and stuff like that. We're really going to have to get involved with stopping their smuggling, aren't we? A bit of whiskey galore too. So let's talk hard borders for the unionists. How are we going to do that? Do you want barbed wire around Barra? Do we need machine guns? Do we need big hairy dogs? And if we're going to control the hard border on Barra like that, are we going to have to do the same in Unst and Shetland? Or maybe Arran? Or maybe Jura? Are you getting a flavour of how stupid the hard border argument is? How absolutely insane it is. So the next unionist that pops up, don't hard border, you'll need to sort out Solway Tweed, and I've just invited you to be new customs officers. You're going, you what? So let's take 2 steps back to, we've got a mad UK system where we've got hardly anybody at all, 24/7, 365 days covering our map, our legal jurisdiction. Well, that's not good. So the next thing is, well, how many guys, how many customs officers would we need to do that? Well, actually, what you do is you get a big piece of A4, actually more likely a whiteboard, and you brainstorm it. And you do a risk analysis with people with local knowledge, so that anybody for the borders, for example, what do you know is actually crossing from England into Scotland that would be a revenue risk? Okay, we can do that. Is there much coming into the Western Isles? What resources we would like to allocate? What I'm saying is you would just do a big logical breakdown of where you need to be. So back to the lady's point about having guys in the Green Channel and what have you. That is actually a valued judgment. Is that customs officer in the Green Channel the most effective place he can be? I'll give you one example. You're in the Green Channel, you find 10,000 cigarettes, and that is job satisfaction. That's really good fun. That's really good sport. You're beating a smuggler and you've got 10,000 cigarettes in front of you. But actually, you know, in the cargo shed in the airport, there's tons and tons and tons of cargo freight moving every single day. And some of it might be undeclared in value. Some of it might be misdescribed. Some of it might have contraband like weapons and drugs and what have you. Should you be looking in air freight, or should you be looking in people's baggage in the Green Channel? I'm asking you to make a valued judgment here. I'm not giving the answer. What I would also like you to consider when it comes to hard border mince is how many 40-foot shipping containers come up the M6 onto the M74 every day. I don't know the answer to that one. Part of the drama, and why I'm asking it, is Scotland operates in a statistical desert. That's the technical jargon. We haven't a baldy clue what the figures are for Scots imports and exports. And if you guys in our new customs service, would you like to know where the traffic is? Is that logical? We don't know. What I'm illustrating here is 40-foot shipping containers, Gretna, on a daily basis. How does that compare to Greenup Container Terminal? How does it compare to Grangemouth container terminal? How would it compare to the roll-on, roll-off ports that we need on the East Coast for a new independent Scotland to generate trade? Where are we going to deploy our customs officers? And then the other level to this, because I'm taking this as a positive silence. Everybody's stunned here. The different levels of this, that you've got the customs import-export side, but the companies that are trading generate huge amounts of value-added tax and huge amounts of excise inland. What I'm suggesting to you is that the customs and borders aspect is not standalone. It has to be seen within a national revenue strategy. So you start off with the big picture. Where is the revenue at risk? Where is the revenue generated? Okay, so we'll divide up our resources to deal with that. But necessarily, you really need to be linked up between the guy at the port and the guy that goes along and carries out a VAT visit or an excise visit to a multinational whiskey distiller. That makes sense, doesn't it? Because it's a kind of left-hand, right-hand thing. And again, it evidences where the UK is, because I read because I'm really sad, I read the National Audit Office report on where they see customs right now, because they kind of invigilate on government performance, and they have got major concerns that because UKBF are immigration, and actually we've got to protect the revenue or collect the revenue, this is really important. It's not working. And actually, I emphasise my point. Take a look at the map again. Look at all the ports and airports. Road crossings will have rail links. There's going to be a whole lot of traffic there that currently just isn't controlled. Or I take that back, the UKBF boys and the HMRC lads who currently still work, they're doing their best. It's not their fault the system is what it is. Many of them are pension prisoners, i.e. they can't get out the job until they get their 40 years in. It's desperate, trust me on this. And it's an excellent example to Eastern European countries and African countries. This is how no to do it. I started to say how sad I was about reading the National Audit Office reports. What I also did yesterday was go on to BBC Parliamentary, and any of you can do that. There's a parliamentary committee, it's still on iPlayer, where maybe a slack handful of MPs asked the heed banana of the Brexit customs project how things were going. I have to say there's a lot of laughs in it. You know, there's a lot of entertainment, because the primary focus of these members of Parliament was, are there enough portaloos for the drivers that were going to get stuck in the traffic jams? How are they for mental health when they're stuck in their cab for days and days and days? Will they get packets of Walker's crisps? I'm belittling, you know, UK parliamentarians who are supposed to be asking crunchy questions. It was just sad. Patently, they had no idea what they were talking about. And then the heed bananas on who were answering the questions weren't asked the crunchy questions. For example, I think most people here, as new customs people, you would say something like, well, how much revenue did the Port of Dover raise in 2019? Okay, let's say 10 billion. Okay. How much revenue do you think the Port of Dover will raise in 2021 as a result of Brexit? It's a reasonable question, isn't it? It wasn't asked. They weren't asking about the trained staff, etc. It was left wide open. We went back to Portaloos and Manston Airfield being, is it a big enough car park? Has anybody been down to have a look? Okay, has anybody got any questions after that wee chunk? Stunned silence. Okay, so hard borders, it's a lot of nonsense. What I'm not making a claim to, and this is the kind of summary part to the second part, what I'm not saying is that there wouldn't be any sort of customs involvement at our borders. It wouldn't be frictionless because necessarily at some stage the company has to make a customs declaration electronically. They would argue immediately, well, that's friction. Well, you know, that's the joys of being an independent country. But would you have to have this new Scottish Customs Service? Would all of us here have to be down in the border 24/7? No, that doesn't make sense at all.
Bill, does the argument about rejoining the EU is probably one for after independence, because it's unlikely the two go hand in hand. But if for some reason we weren't to rejoin the EU but were to go the EFTA route or, you know, some other option, do any of these requirements change, or does any of the focus change?
I would answer that with saying compare and contrast Norway, who is in the European Free Trade Association but not in the EU, and how do they get on with dealing with Sweden, which is in the EU. And actually, in answer to your question, does it change much in terms of customs controls? No, it doesn't. But what the Swedes and the Norwegians have got is a very grown-up relationship where any customs posts on the Norwegian side or the Swedish side of the border, they double up. The Swedish guy does Norwegian work and the Norwegian guy does Swedish work. So in terms of what the implications of controls, well, they dovetail it. And you would like to think that with our friends in the south, that it's in nobody's interest to do anything other than to sit down and work out, you know, like, how do we work together? Because, you know, like Northern Ireland's a classic example. Where there's a will, there's a way. And certainly, I was going to make the point in my next chunk, how important it is to have inter-regional cooperation at a customs level, because what Brexit UK is driving at is having a very xenophobic setup where they don't like anybody, and actually that's counterproductive to carrying out customs controls, if that answers the question.
We've got a few questions as well, so do you want me to read out Carol from Skye? Welcome, Carol. We had a customs officer on Skye. We knew who to ask about strange lights, strange boats at night.
Okay, well, you're touching on a very, very strong point for having our own customs service, and it was going to be part of my third chunk, but we're about to roll into that. That the whole point, like back in the day, all the way from the Shetlands down the west coast, down the east coast, you had many, many customs stations, and you had officers who were part of the community. So on Skye, for example, if the guy, and I seem to recall if they were switched on to ships turning up in the middle of the night, then they were able to lift the phone and do something about it. But equally, your point's very, very valid about, you know, within a community where there is any sort of smuggling going on, what it means is any shops that sell alcohol, tobacco, or perhaps even white goods like fridges, if stuff's being smuggled into your community, then A, our treasury's not getting the cash, but B, it's undermining the local shops, the local community, because they don't have a level playing field, which is classic stuff. It's why you have a customs service in the first place, and it's just as likely to affect somebody in Skye or Ullapool as it would be in Coldstream. It's actually it's very, very valid, because I'll throw in an anecdote. There was a smuggling run with drugs from North Africa coming up the west coast. Did it go to Skye? I think it was Seal Island, just south of Oban, and a combined operation following this vessel up from West Africa. The vessel was lost from the surveillance that was going on, and it was like, oh my God, where have these smugglers gone? And then a local officer that I know who was directly involved in it, he says, I know what I'll do. Where was it last seen? So he phoned up the district nurse, who had a great view of the coastline of this particular island. He then phoned up the butcher who did home deliveries, etc., etc. And they were all in first name terms, because the local customs guy, he builds himself into the community. There's an integrity thing about paying revenues and not being a smuggler. So actually you go to this guy, and within a few phone calls, he was able to narrow down which bay this vessel had anchored in, and was able to say to the suits, I found your boat for you. It's lying in such and such a bay. If you want to reboot your surveillance, that's where you'll find it. And that was done purely through community involvement.
We've got a few more. Janine's asking, do you want me to ask for you, Janine? What do they do in Greece?
No, it was just like in response to the point about the number of kilometres of coastline that we've got in Scotland. I mean, such an immense number, and thinking about the islands, and I was just wondering about other countries with a lot of islands. Of course, a completely different situation, because they are in Europe and they're going to stay in Europe as well. And it was just a point. You don't have to answer it.
No, it makes total sense. If you don't mind, I'll do my third chunk, and then we can put the bones on this, because it's very, very valid. If everybody's okay with that.
There's just another couple of questions. So there's Morag and Dougie have asked, how many customs jobs in a new Scotland?
That's part of the third bit.
Right.
Right.
Okay, I think that was all the questions, yeah?
All right. Okay, so do you mind bringing up the next slide, please?
Oh.
That's the one. Okay, so this new customs service that you're all joining. Okay, so my point would be that would the Scots public be better off with a law enforcement Scottish customs service with legal primacy in customs revenue collection and control? The paper that I've just done for the Scottish Independence Convention, the paper argues that the answer is self-evident, that to have our own Scottish Customs Service would be the raison d'etre of a public service of approximately 800 to 1,000 staff, trained and resourced to protect society. A professional customs service with a strong esprit de corps must be integrated within a prioritised Scots revenue strategy in order to collect and protect revenues required for our pensions, for our NHS, for education and welfare. So, on the one hand, on the slide in front of you, you can see that you know, the customs officer, that's the traditional green channel thing. And then the point about the left-hand side of the screen is to illustrate, actually, it's not just the green channel at Glasgow Airport. It's not a border crossing point just to the north of Hexham, that actually you've got deep water there, and you've got perhaps contraband being smuggled over the horizon. The customs term is that ship that you see there is over the horizon, and they get small boats to run ashore, perhaps into Skye or Arran or Barra, and that's called coopering. That hasn't stopped. It goes on all the time. So a couple of anecdotes about there, you know, where we are on this and what a Scottish Customs Service could do. Well, it has to be it can't be standalone. It has to be part of a national revenue strategy. It is one cog in the wheel. Okay, so the Customs Department would be told, do you know what, we need you to raise 60% of Scotland's revenue. So that's big picture stuff, that's strategy. And the heed bananas will immediately say, oh my God, how much? But actually, that's the name of the game. That's what the customs service would be there to do, to collect revenues on behalf of our communities. So you start off with big picture targets, and then what that would then break down into, somebody mentioned this earlier, I don't know if people can see that. Is this paper still extant? It was a document we did for Commonweal, and it suggests how a customs service in Scotland should be set up. I'll give you the web link for that at the end. The point being that maybe we should be looking at an East Coast setup, an East Coast setup and a West Coast setup, making use of, for example, Rosyth in the east and Fastlane and Coolport in the west, so that all of our existing defence facilities are a start point for our controls. Traditionally, if you think back to the map that was there, brown water, the 3 mile stuff, 12 mile stuff, belongs to the customs service. Blue water, which is all the way out 200 miles, would belong to the Navy. Necessarily, logically, the customs guys and the Navy would be working very, very closely together, because it would be idiotic not to, and the Coast Guard and all these good people. Okay, so that is like, here's your national targets that the government needs. That's then broken down, and I'm making this really simplistically, into a West Coast and an East Coast organisation, where, given the staff and the resources that they have, they prioritise in order to achieve the targets. So you can start to think, well, actually, that guy that the unionist talks about being at Gretna in the guard box is actually not very useful. That actually, that guy would be much better off in a container port, where there is huge amounts of revenue in import and export freight. And then you break that down into the tactical level. So we've gone strategic, operational, tactical. The trained customs officer, the boy in the Ladybird book there, he then he's very, very clear about where he fits into the system. I'll be simplistic again, but in a kind of positive manner, that an independent Scotland would be looking to create about 1,000 worthwhile resourced careers, which is actually a bit of a hook for independence, I would have thought. So anyway, these 1,000 guys, properly trained and resourced, let's say for the sake of argument, he's on 30k a year, including office overheads and all the other good stuff. If you then say to that one guy, look mate, 30,000 a year, I really want you to earn $250,000. Or let's try it another way. Let's say the guy that goes to the corporations in Aberdeen, we need you on your 30 grand a year to find $500,000 a year. So you can see how this works, that if you've got 1,000 officers all generating individual key performance indicators, as in revenue, you really, really, really reduce your logistics and support tail in order to get the guys in the trenches getting revenue for our communities, for our pensions, for the NHS, which is not happening right now within the UK. I'll throw in a couple of anecdotes. I checked on the internet today how what kind of revenues are being brought across the borders. On the customs website for the Republic for Ireland, on the 1st of November at Cork Airport, an officer found 26,000 cigarettes. The revenue potential lost was about €15,000. Bear with me on this. On the 30th of October at Dublin Airport, an officer, a team found 57 kilos of tobacco, and the potential loss was €30,000. So what? That's kind of small beer, given that I'm trying to suggest that we should be in container ports and all the rest of it. Well, here's the building blocks. This is what a customs officer does, because if you take those two examples in the Republic of smuggling that's happening daily just with tobacco. If you take a daily rate of €30,000, call that €630,000 monthly, call that €8 million a year on smuggling by passengers. I haven't mentioned trucks. I haven't mentioned 40-foot shipping containers. I'm talking about dudes coming off the duty-free flight from Tenerife who can hardly lift his case for tobacco. So is that happening in Scotland is the obvious question. Sticking with the cross-border thing in Ireland right now with the Brexit, what they've actually done is very sensibly, they've set up a joint agency task force, and that's the revenue guys on both sides of the borders and the police on both sides of the borders. So what it means is they've got a fairly impressive system given the resources they have. So what? In May this year, they got 8 million cigarettes on a job, which involved potential revenue loss of £3 million. It resulted in seizures and arrests in both sides of the borders in Newry and Carlingford. Okay, so in terms of all you new customs guys, you want a bit of that action, don't you? I mean, you want to be there when you want to be the guy that seizes 8 million cigarettes. I mean, is that job satisfaction or what? I mean, that's a severe buzz, but you've just saved the community, about £3 million with one job. So big picture wise, how much does the UK lose just from tobacco annually? And we know tobacco rates, people are smoking less, there's less tobacco smuggling going on. How much does the UK lose? And the answer, according to a government website, is £2 billion annually. That is a huge fraction of the money that Scotland would need to run itself on a daily basis. And I repeat, shamelessly, that's only tobacco. That's no bevy. That's not white goods. That's not the million and one things that a smuggler likes to smuggle. So I think what I'm concluding here with this point is that it is insane not to collect the revenues on behalf of our communities. How the UK is getting away with it right now, well, I do know why, but it's just like going to no do that, going to set up our own systems for the benefit of our communities. Does that make sense? Notwithstanding drugs and weapons and all the rest of it. Okay, any questions on that wee bit? Again, stunned silence.
What about the cost and the time required to set up these systems?
Okay, I'll come back to, a guy that's effective, say at Glasgow Airport freight terminal, where he knows what he's looking for. You'll know what I'm talking about, Alistair. That takes quite a lot of time to get that guy up and running. So what we're talking about here is transition from current UK to Independence Day. That's actually quite a crucial thing. How much time do we have? What transition period would we have in order to identify the resources that we need? Because the other thing is that there's no custom stations anymore. Skye and Barra and all points north, all those custom stations were sold a long time ago. So your nightmare scenario is to get people up and running as soon as possible. You maybe be talking about port cabins and a car park, etc. But that's where the strategists have got to come in. How are you going to resource this? How are you going to staff this? And I'll throw in an answer. It's actually it's clearly a very, very good question, because would we have to start from scratch? This piece of A4, this whiteboard that I'm talking about, with brainstorming with Scottish Customs officers. Well, actually, there's the World Customs Organisation. They have their own university in Australia, which generates something called the International Network of Customs Universities. So there's a worldwide network of sharing, let's call it best practice, etc., etc. Would a Scottish Customs Service want to have a university in Scotland on that network to pull in all the good ideas, etc., etc., to make it easier for ourselves? In a heartbeat, of course we would. Which I know your next question is going to be, well, how many INCU universities are there affiliated within the UK? You'll be gobsmacked to know none. You go into the INCU website and have a look at affiliated universities, customs universities in Germany, vielleicht 12, you know, they're all over it. What I'm also saying is that back in the day when you and I were doing this stuff, did anybody at any stage say, look mate, what I want you to do is go away for a year and do a master's on anti-smuggling in rural areas? That'd be a good idea, wouldn't it? I mean, you would enjoy it, you come back with all this good stuff, and then you teach the rest of the troops. So within that university network, within the World Customs Organisation, and certainly within the EU Mateus system, part of your professional development, part of your, you know, looking after people, you know, here's the cash for a master's or a PhD. Go and come back with really good stuff, and then we'll thrash it out. I mean, it's a statement of the blindingly obvious, but do you know what? The Banana Republic countries that I was talking about right at the very start, Ethiopia does it, Congo does it, England doesn't, but they've got nothing to learn, if I was to be really cynical. Don't know if that answers your question a wee bit.
Yeah, it does, Bill. Yeah.
There's a few others from Alec McCulloch. Why is UK consciously negligent in this area?
Well, I think you only have to think of politics, and I'm not going to use my my last slide, the cartoon, which illustrates this point perfectly. The sweeping generalisation answer is that when Gordon Brown got rid of HM Customs and Excise, it was done to save money because you amalgamated two government departments. Again, being a sado, when you read through Hansard and all the committees, who took those decisions, when, and what were the ramifications? Did anybody say, you know, what's the penalty clause for this? Funny old thing, those questions weren't asked back in 2003, 2004, 2005. Political decision had been made, deregulate the city. Those customs guys, they've been about for 100 years. They're bloody Rottweilers. All they want to keep on talking about collecting and protecting the revenue on behalf of their communities and society. They're after nuts. We need to get rid of them. So a red line was taken through customs and excise to have a much more malleable, deregulated situation where the multinationals, they're getting it again, they can carry out international trade, and there's nobody going to be looking in the back of their trucks.
Okay, a couple from Janine. I'll just say them together, Janina. Wouldn't you expect smuggling rates to reduce a lot once a decent customs service is up and running? And would they disappear, or would they just start paying taxes?
Great question.
Can I just add, please, Bill, I was just thinking about sort of the paradox of some of the figures that you mentioned about, for example, when they found all the cigarettes in Ireland. So we were thinking of that lost revenue, but then if you have a strict system, then you know that the whole activity might disappear. I mean, I just wondered what the kind of research showed on that.
Well, let's make it a Scotland-England context then. Scotland's in the EU, England is not. What you would like to think would happen, and I know the Irish are wrestling with this, is a word called harmonisation. If the revenue rates on 10,000 cigarettes are the same on both sides of your border, there's no reason to smuggle. You can't make money on it. But if England has high customs rates, let's call them tariffs, because that's what Brexit's all about. This is what it means. If England's got really high revenue rates on cigarettes and Scotland hasn't, well, guess which way the smuggling's going to go? And you can work that any way you like. Harmonisation at an EU level is massive because you're completely simplistically eliminating the reason for smuggling. If a smuggler's a businessman, a smuggler has a balance sheet, he has overheads and all the rest of it, and he's trying to work out how he makes a profit. The difference between a smuggler and a bona fide businessman is one plays by the rules and the other doesn't. But they're both trying to do the same thing. They're both trying to make money. So if you've got illegal cash and you can really, would you be able to eliminate the black economy? No, I don't think so. I think that's fanciful. But most countries wrestle with, okay, at a strategic government level, what size of black economy can we cope with? So what I'm saying there is that, right, okay, we know smuggling goes on, but it's tiny and it doesn't affect the revenues we need to run the country. However, if it's taken huge chunks out of government plans and strategy, then there's only one or two things going to happen, which is what we've got in the UK. If the big companies aren't paying in their proper percentage and or smuggling, it means that the guy in the street and the small and medium enterprises, they are paying the revenues to keep the UK going. Now, if people think that's fair, I think Tories do, then that's okay. When you hear Rhys Moog saying the other week, actually, you know, with a straight face, we've got more than enough revenue, we're fine. What he's saying is that Westminster's budgeted for what they need on a daily basis. Therefore, to raise more, to go and find that 120 billion tax gap, let's not bother with that, because that affects his community and therefore says a lot about where the priority is in resourcing.
Okay, there's still another couple of questions. So another one from Alec. Would a robust Scottish customs organisation create a competitive advantage versus our UK?
Another great question. Companies that are getting hammered in the south might look at a better trading environment where they can trade and make a profit. They're not being undermined. I know anecdotally in the southeast of England that a lot of people stopped, a lot of guys that had cash and carries and what have you. There was no point in them being open because of the endemic smuggling coming across the channel. I mean, why would you set up a cash and carry or have part of your petrol station forecourt or having a corner shop which relies on baccy and alcohol if it's undermined by the smuggler that's trading at the back of a van at the end of the street? So I believe it would make a competitive advantage.
Okay, and another one from Carol. Is it true? This is what I wonder as well. Is it truth or fiction that Scottish exports are counted as English revenues, e.g. whisky, if they leave from an English port?
Okay, the answer to that one is the first part is the statistical desert that I was talking about earlier on. We don't know the scale of Scottish imports and Scottish exports. And part of that is in the question that if a 40-foot container of malt goes out from Hull to the continent and not through a Scottish port, is it a Scottish export or is it an English export? It's an English export. It's got to be. And that raises all sorts of questions in terms of, well, you know, like, I'll stick with whiskey. global sales of whisky is measured in something like, I don't know, I'll make a figure up, 20 billion a year, of which Scotland gets 3 and 4 pence. How does that work? You know, where if it strikes at the fundamental of revenues, is revenues should be directed to what the collection of revenues has got to be directed towards wealth. And at that point, that 40-watt light bulb comes on when, hold on a minute, what you're saying, revenues should be taken from wealth. Well, that opens up the whole issue of what customs and excise do, that if you focus on not the guy in the street on ESA washing windows for cash, if you concentrate on wealth, which must be land, for example, the grouse thing, land reform, who owns the land? Well, because that's massive wealth, and tied in with that is the multinationals, because the huge amounts of wealth that Scotland generates, would it not be common sense and logical to concentrate a lot of your resources there?
Okay. So another couple of questions. So Carmel and Ian from Dumfries and Galloway, how about non-customs barriers? If England adopts lower food standards than we do, how do we protect ourselves from smuggling?
Okay, let's not have a hard border. Let's deal with issues like that in a smart, technological manner. That, say, for example, your the food from an English trader comes north of the border and it's of lower standards. The point I'm making about the Scottish Customs Service covering the legal jurisdiction, you can allow that English van with suspect English or American chlorinated chicken to get all the way up to Ullapool. And then you can make a control visit or an audit in Ullapool. You don't need to do it at Gretna. Does that make sense? That when it comes to contraband or things that the Scottish Government says is important to us, like food standards, like protecting our agriculture, you don't need to do it at Gretna. You can set up a network of custom stations where importers can freely turn up and say, hello you, this is me, I've got chickens, does anybody want to have a look? Obviously that's well simplistic, but you get the idea. It could be in the city centre in Glasgow. Let's say we don't like hard borders, and how would we resource a system where we could actually make random stops? Okay, well, let's call that on the A9. Let's have a government station which has Department of Transport, weighbridges, the police service for checking serviceability. Why would we not invite a customs team along and have such stations available on a permanent or non-permanent basis anywhere in Scotland?
And that's just a couple of comments there as well. Alistair McFadden, is that the situation of exports that suits?
It was the statistical desert that Bill was talking about.
Well, actually, one of the points that the Northern Ireland consultant made today was something that I'd forgotten. When somebody makes a customs declaration, obviously from a customs point of view, you're looking at the value, is it misdescribed, etc., etc. One of the fundamental reasons for having a customs declaration is to capture statistics. What's the goods? What's the values? Who's it going to and from, etc. One of the huge transition issues that Scotland would have to address is setting up a robust statistical system. And customs are integral to that for your import and export, as well as a gazillion other things. what I'm suggesting also is that for government to come up with any sort of strategy when they're blind in one eye, that's not easy. But actually, pretty much that's what we've got.
And then there's another comment there, bigging you up there, saying absolute sense. Good man.
Fivers in the post.
So I think
Okay, well,
that's everything.
that takes us to our kind of our final bit then. Okay, so can we bring up the last slide, please? And this will sum it up. Picture paints 1,000 words. There you go. How current is that? You know, according to GERS, I'm not going to go there. GERS has been completely shown to be rubbish, and you've got Mr. Multinational Corporation himself saying, right, okay, I'll buy Scotland. It's obviously an economic basket case, and then our other mucker Boris saying, don't take things at face value. Okay, this is what we've got right now. This is where we are. Boris on the right-hand side is absolutely ripping the proverbial. So my final point would be is completely upbeat, because Scotland has a golden opportunity in the horizon for our society and economy to be a happier, fairer place to live and work, which can be brought about by real distribution of wealth, by robust revenues reform. Scotland must seize the hour. A Scottish Customs Service must be a key component of an aspirational vision which makes the economic cake bigger, rather than being perceived as a mere bureaucratic overhead. We've had limited economic autonomy within this sandbag of a union. So for those that say Scotland cannot be competent in handling our borders and revenues, their assertions are invalid and illogical, because how would they know? Regurgitation of neocon policy within a Brexit COVID future cannot be the way ahead. We must positively focus on our economic potential. How? Through democracy, actually. Our population must have a genuine say on how we raise our revenues through our elected representatives, and therefore on what it is spent on and how. This is, when you're speaking to somebody in East Africa or West Africa, you should see the smiles, because it's like, right, the revenues don't go straight into the big fella's pocket in government. We, the people, are the customs service. In fact, the lady from Skye, every single citizen in Scotland becomes a customs officer, because it's in your interest to. You might have the uniform dudes, but actually it's in everybody's interest that the fat cats get told to jog on. So, democracy through active participation builds trust and solidarity. And do you know what? Folks start to pay their taxes. Trust is not built through exclusion and xenophobia. This is the strongest argument for open EU cross-border cooperation, not Brexit alienation. That concludes the presentation, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay.
Don't clap, just throw money.
I'll just see if there's any other, there's a new message here. Carol, oh, this has been brilliant, thank you. It will not be away from, okay. Any other questions or comments?
What time's the next bus to Kilmarnock?
Can I just say I know a few more things that I didn't know after this evening, and I'd like to thank you for such a clear and concise explanation of something which frankly was beyond me. It's still a bit beyond me, but I know more than I did. Thank you very much.
Very welcome.
Anyone else? Yeah, I think it's the lateral thinking. It's like, we've got this, so why don't we do that with it? And it just makes sense. So that's good. So I'll bring Malcolm in a wee minute to finish everything off. But so just thanks very much, Bill. That's really fantastic, especially because it was our first one. You know, it's like, oh. And thanks everyone for coming along. It's been great to see everybody. And that's the one good thing about Zoom, is that you can come in from anywhere. So it's really exciting to meet up with other groups and not just the Southside. We've got other activities coming up as well. So we're doing stalls if the weather permits. We'll probably take part, there's a Bridges for India event on the 21st of November. We're hoping to take part in that. And we're also going to have a St Andrew's Day Ceilidh on Zoom. So these are things that are coming up. So I'll just hand over to Malcolm. I think he was going to say a couple of things.
Well, thanks a lot, Bill. That was fantastic. Really appreciated that. So for folk that say that it's a stimulus, you're stimulated, but you want to know more, Bill has material available that I'll let him punt before he goes away. But I really appreciate Bill taking the time to put that presentation together. I thought it was, it really was important stuff to know. And I'd like to thank Jane as well, and Zen for putting it together, and Jane for hosting it. That was really smoothly done, Jane. So I think you're a pro at that. So I really appreciate it. And hopefully the Yes Southside folk will be able to come along and participate in the stuff Jane was mentioning. I don't know what the weather forecast is like for Saturday, but hopefully we'll have a stall out or two. And we're going to have these regularly, I think. So I'm trying to get a date for Open Democracy, to a speaker from Open Democracy who's indicated he's keen to do a presentation on the British state and how to recognise it. So that sounds quite interesting as well. So there'll be a few things like that coming along, and I hope you can all manage. And thanks very much for joining the meeting. Okay, cheers anyway. Thanks.
The things that I was going to mention that are actually free, if you go into the Commonweal website, there's a white paper on how a customs service in Scotland could be set up. And also the Commonweal, John MacDonald contributed to this one in terms of Scotland's defence and foreign policy, and actually customs really fits in with that. If anybody needs, more reading material, just go into Commonweal or Source, I think it's called now. And then the last bit, again, the Scottish Independence Convention have set up a transition group. Customs and Borders should be, the Customs and Borders paper should be getting published this month. And then there'll be a sequence of papers, hopefully, that deal with crunchy things like tax, that you're going to get between now and May 2021 and IndyRef 2. So watch out for that document appearing as well for those that want further reading. I've calmed down a wee bit because I was absolutely jangling before this. I had no idea how this would go. Thanks very much, Jane, for setting it all up. I think I got most of my points across that, it's the whole customs gigs for our communities in our society, and it's as simple as that.
That's great. Thank you very much. And I've got the links you sent, so I can send out the links to the people.
Fantastic.
Okay then. So thanks everybody. See you again. Hopefully, take care.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
See you.
Bye.
Brilliant.
Bye.
Bye. You're welcome.
You've been listening to Indie Live Radio Yes Group's Spotlight series, where we broadcast talks and presentations from Yes Groups all around Scotland. That was a meeting organised by Yes Southside Glasgow Group with their guest Bill Austin. And Bill spoke about borders and customs, a topic that is no doubt going to be debated heatedly in the second referendum campaign. Have a look on the Indie Live blog and you'll find visual aids that Bill used during the talk, along with links to further info about borders and customs. And just to repeat it, the Indie Live Radio team want to say thank you to the Yes Southside group for agreeing to let us broadcast this meeting. We really appreciate it.